start off with saying a little bit about who I am. My name is Dr. Janine Brandt. I'm a medical doctor that works currently for the South African Public Health Service. But in the gaming world, most people know me as Nene. That's my in-game name, and I've been a gamer for most of my life. I've competed in the competitive scene for my country for the last 3 years. I've recently retired from competitive gaming, but still play leisurely. And part of the reason why I'm here today is because I am busy doing 2 concurrent research projects. I mean, they don't really have anything to do with each other, but the first one I'm doing is I'm looking at so I'm basically doing a systematic literature review, looking at the information that's available on health in gamers, because the literature that's available on health in esports is quite limited, and you'll actually get a first-hand experience from someone that's published an esports paper in the States. David, in our panel discussion, is going to be very exciting. And my second research that I'm doing is looking at qualitative analysis of how females experience their position in esports, because I sit on the MSSA, so Mind Sports South Africa's Women's Representative Desk. So I represent the needs and opportunities of female gamers and esports players in our country. So yeah, basically, the whole purpose of this conference is understanding various aspects of esports and understanding the link between different aspects of esports and how we can relate models in traditional sports to esports, and then networking with key stakeholders to reach consensus for esports development. So when you think about esports versus traditional sports, they aren't actually that different. I know, what a shock. But if you think about it, you have teams, you have owners, you have coaches, you have matches and championships and prizes, and all of these things are related to like the similarities in gaming. The whole thing that people always, or the thing that people always mention or point out, is that esports gamers aren't typically known for their athletic ability. But I think the most important thing is to realize that in health, you know, there are health issues that are important in gaming and in esports gamers, and it's important for us to understand what that means so that we can come up with solutions to improve the health in esports gamers. So there was actually supposed to be a picture here. I'm not sure why it's not, but it was actually a picture of myself in the height of my competitive career, with my setup and like 10 bottles or cans of Monster and like 2 stacks of pizza boxes, like curled up in my chair in the middle of the night, playing into our tournament, which is very appropriate for what I think is stereotypical of gaming culture and competitive gaming culture, and that's poor dietary health, poor posture, and poor sleep-wake cycles, which are all topics that I'm going to be talking about. So these are the topics I'm going to be dealing with. So the first one I'm going to start off with is sort of dietary issues. I took to my Twitter and I asked people who play games typically what they think are the most important health issues that should be addressed in gamers and esports gamers, and I've highlighted some of the important issues that I'm going to be talking about in red. You know, fatigue, insomnia, neglect of basic needs, bad posture, finger pains, repetitive strain injuries. So these are the types of things that people who play games think are an issue. And we should be listening to the people that have experience and have first-hand knowledge in this, because it's affecting them. So the first thing I'm talking about is dietary concerns, and I've split it up into 2 topics. That's sedentary behaviors and energy drink consumption. So basically, when you look at sedentary behaviors, what this means is it's the time that it's defined as doing an activity where you're sitting or lying down and your basal metabolic rate drops to about 1. And basically, studies have shown that video gaming, and not inclusive of like exergaming or gaming where you are involved in like physical movements like Wii or virtual reality, has shown that they have similar outcomes in food consumption like TV watching. So basically, when you are sitting in front of your computer and you are playing games and you're competing in your tournaments, your food consumption increases. See, the problem is that your food consumption isn't, you know, mushrooms and lean chicken breasts and all these things. It's McDonald's and Monster and energy drinks and pizza, foods that are high in calorie content and low in nutritional value. Now, the problem with that is, as I'm sure you can understand, is that that will increase the development of central adiposity. So essentially, you're going to be collecting fat around your like stomach region. And as we all know, being overweight has multiple health consequences. The papers and the studies that have been published about even, you know, 5 kilograms over the weight limit for your BMI, for your height, has shown a dramatic increase in health outcomes. So we're saying that if you spend your time playing video games, your food consumption is going to increase, and it's food consumption that is not nutritious. Therefore, you're going to be increasing your weight. And now, the studies that have been done on self-esteem and self-image has been directly linked to how people view themselves. Social media is a very big culprit in this. You know, even though we've like moved towards more body positivity sort of campaigns, I definitely think that you know, there's a great link between people who experience low self-esteem and how they view themselves in terms of whether they're overweight or not. And this then leads to increased screen time because people are using sort of gaming as an escape. So this is the first thing that I think is important for us to talk about is, what are our esports gamers eating? How do they consume their foods? What foods are they consuming? Okay, then the next thing to talk about is energy drink consumption, which is quite a understudied, you know, the effects are understudied, especially in esports gamers. So energy drinks, like, such as Monster and Red Bull, are basically beverages that contain caffeine, taurine, guarana, vitamins, herbal supplements, and all of these things. And when you think about these words, and when you hear these words, you're thinking to yourself probably, but none of those sound very harmful. You know, people drink caffeine in coffee, you have herbal supplements in, you know, vitamins that you take daily. Now, the problem is that the studies on the combination of these items hasn't been accurately looked at, and a lot of these substances aren't regulated in a lot of countries. So there isn't policies on how much of these items should be in drinks, or what is like healthy or normal limits in these drinks. And also, you know, when you're thinking about who are these things aimed at, who are energy drinks marketed at, it's mostly people between the ages of 12 and 25. They market it as, you know, to improve performance and concentration. So yes, while caffeine does improve short-term concentration and performance, the long-term effects and the other negative effects aren't often, you know, pointed out. The adverse effects that are associated with caffeine are not very common, and literature has supported this. They're very rare, actually, and it's usually in people who have pre-existing medical conditions. Usually will get caffeine-related adverse effects. So, is there really a harm in drinking these beverages? That's the questions. So the thing I'm going to be focusing on with this is caffeine. So most of these beverages market their caffeine content to be around 70 to 80 milligrams per 150 moles. This is 3 times the amount of caffeine that you have in Coca-Cola or other cola beverages, and approximately 2 times more than a cup of strong coffee. Now the problem is that this is just the added caffeine into these beverages. They aren't, or people that make these drinks aren't adding in the fact that some of the substances in these drinks themselves contain caffeine. So for example, guarana is a Brazilian plant that has very high caffeine content. It's very similar to the coffee bean, and it's also added in a lot of these energy drinks. So when you're thinking about the caffeine content of energy beverages, it's actually much higher than is stated on the bottle. So why is this an issue? Caffeine is a central nervous system stimulant. So what that means is, and this is a very busy slide, there are both benefits and detriments to having increased caffeine, but there are 2 that I would like to point out because it links into one of my next topics, and it's rapid heartbeat and an increase in blood pressure. So an increase in heart rate in the absence of physical activity can lead to the development of arrhythmias, which is abnormal heartbeats. When your heart beats faster, you aren't giving your heart enough time to fill with blood. So if you think about it, the heart requires time to fill with blood, and then that blood volume gets pumped out into the body with the oxygen that will supply your brain, your muscles, and the other parts of your body. So if you're shortening the time that your heart has to fill, you're actually reducing the oxygen delivery of your blood. So essentially less oxygen is getting to your brain, to your muscles, and to the other parts of your body. So essentially you can think of it as having a poorer quality of heartbeat, if you want to say. And the issue with this is that there are long-term consequences of depriving parts of the body from oxygen. The other thing to point out is high blood pressure. So when you have an increased blood pressure is basically the measurement of compliance of your blood vessels. So what that means is if you think of a hose pipe, when a hose pipe's exit is very narrow, the water comes out quite forcefully. So the force that it takes to get the water out of the pipe is increased. So what this means is that the contractility of the heart has to be more in order to push the blood, the same volume of blood, out of the heart if you have increased blood pressure. And the problem with this is that in the long term, you're increasing your heart's muscle bulk, which, you know, to most gym people sounds like a good thing, but in cardiology is actually a bad thing. When your heart muscle bulk increases, you're more at risk of developing left ventricular failure, which leads to cardiovascular and heart disease, so heart failure essentially. So while caffeine only causes very short-term effects and changes in heart rate and blood pressure, the effects actually end up being long-term if you are constantly drinking these substances. So if you're constantly subjecting yourself to caffeine, you're constantly actually increasing your heart rate, you're constantly increasing your blood pressure, and therefore the long-term consequences are actually seen more in those instances. Now, unfortunately, we don't have long-term studies that have looked at, you know, these sort of issues in health. We can only determine through inference and causalities what the long-term effects of this is on the body. You know, it would be very interesting if we could, you know, have a long-term, like a 10-year cohort following competitive esports gamers to see what, you know, the effect of their diet and the things that they consume, such as caffeinated beverages. What is the long-term outcomes on health? So the next thing I'm going to talk about is sleep-wake cycles. So in order to understand sleep-wake cycles, you first have to understand what a normal sleep cycle is. So this is the architecture of a normal sleep cycle. So basically you have sleep onset latency, which is the time that it takes you to actually, from when you close your eyes to fall asleep. It should last between 5 to 10 minutes in healthy individuals. Then stage 1 is your light sleep stage. This is where you can easily be woken up from. The things in the body start to slow down, and it usually lasts about 20 minutes. Stage 2 is where now your brain waves start slowing down, and this is where it restores the physically affected parts of the body, so sore muscles, if you have pain. Stage 2 is the most important stage in like physical restoration of the body. Stage 3 and 4 are combined because there is not really a consensus of whether there's only one stage after stage 2 or whether there are two. But this is where you have delta waves predominating in your brain, and your breathing slows down and your muscles relax. And this is the stage that causes mental recharging. This is the stage of your sleep that makes you feel well rested. So if you're spending a lot of time in stage 3 and 4, you wake up feeling like you had a good night's rest. Okay. And then lastly is your REM sleep, which is the sleep where you are dreaming. And this is, it's pivotal for the development of memory, mood, and learning. So you're activating those centers while you're sleeping in order to essentially, during the day, the things that you learn, see, and hear, that you can package those all nicely while you're sleeping. So that's the purpose of REM sleep. Okay, so what does gaming and esports do to sleep-wake cycles? So there are 3 pivotal studies that have been published, and the consensus in all of them is that your increased screen time lengthens your sleep onset latency. So what that means is that it takes longer for you to fall asleep. So essentially you're spending a longer time laying in bed, being restless, trying to get your brain to shut off. Additionally, there was a less subjective sleepiness that was reported from video game users and gamers. So what this means is that you feel less tired, therefore you are not going to go to sleep at the time that is normal for you to go to sleep, or that you should usually go to sleep. So it leads to a later sleep time and shorter sleep length. So essentially you're cutting down the time that you're sleeping because you don't feel tired. Funnily enough, these studies and multiple other studies have shown that there's no disturbance in your sleep architecture. Sleep architecture is that like little picture that I had on this cycle and the stages of sleep. So basically it doesn't shorten or lengthen any stage of sleep that you stay in. It just shortens your overall time that you'll be asleep. The problem with this is cardiovascular disease. So there's a link between obesity, shorter sleep duration, increased caffeine intake, and poor sleep quality that all affects the heart. So a study showed that 6 hours of sleep or less, which actually doesn't seem like too bad, getting 6 hours of sleep. At least I know when I was in medical school, I definitely wasn't getting that. 6 hours or less shows a 15% increase of getting cardiovascular disease than 7 hours of sleep a night. That's 15% in medical research. That's a large percentage of people that are getting cardiovascular disease simply because you're getting 1 less hour of sleep. So for those of you that are getting 6 hours, think about rather getting 7. Also, the risk of heart failure is 5% for men and 7% for women for each increment of 1 in your body mass index. So your body mass index is your height squared divided by your weight, okay, or your weight divided by your height squared, and that's your body mass index. Okay, so it's a measure that we as doctors use to determine whether you are normal weight, underweight, overweight, or obese. And so every 1 increment of that increases your chances for getting heart failure. So obesity, poor sleep, all of these contribute to having cardiovascular disease in the long term. Then one of the very common issues that happens in esports gamers is musculoskeletal issues. And I'm going to leave this, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because I believe David has a lot more insight into this topic. But their study was looking at pain in esports gamers and where they experience pain, and it's a very common thing that's brought up, especially in competitive esports gamers that are doing the same repetitive motion for multiple hours a day. You're finding that the predominance of where people are experiencing pain is from the neck all the way down to the hands that essentially are being used in gaming and in their consoles or their mouses and stuff. And with the development of things like tendonitis and bursitis, which is essentially inflammation of the tendons in the hands, it's quite painful and very difficult to manage once it's developed in patients. It's very difficult to manage, especially if you develop it quite young in your life. And then hand-arm vibration syndrome, which is typically seen in console players where the console vibrates. And these are some of the risk factors. So females are more at risk of developing musculoskeletal complaints. The more hours that you spend playing, obviously, there's a direct relationship between the development of musculoskeletal complaints and a lack of ergonomic setup. So luckily, companies nowadays are moving towards developing highly specialized and personalized setups for esports gamers, because they realized that there was an issue in these pain syndromes that esports gamers were experiencing. So this is a very good example of where we have noticed a problem and have acted on it and have said, you know, there is a solution that we can come up with this, and that is the development of ergonomic, you know, gaming setups. Then, I don't know why, this is the mental benefits and detriments of gaming. This is a very large topic, and there's not enough time in the world to talk about all of the mental benefits and detriments that happen in esports gamers and gaming in general. But I'll start off with the detriments, and it's shown that time spent playing games increases your likelihood of having negative outcomes. So the studies have shown that, you know, if your increase in playing times has been linked to increases in ADHD-related behaviors. It's also time spent away from other responsibilities such as schoolwork, university work, and other home responsibilities. They've shown that action games, so games with sort of antisocial content, so this means like killing, violence, lack of empathy for your enemies, stuff like that. That's considered antisocial content when we talk about psychiatry and psychology. Action games are linked with reduced empathy, stress-related antisocial actions, so you have less stress-related responses to things that should give you stress, and confrontational behaviors. So this is probably the most controversial area of gaming and the effects of games, simply because of all of the unfortunate events that have happened in the States with school shootings, and that's why quite a large amount of research has been done in this specific field. Then obviously addiction and a decrease in pro-social behavior. So pro-social behavior is essentially when you are talking with your friends and you are building lasting and meaningful friendships, and you're having social interactions with people face to face. That's pro-social behaviors. So video gaming addiction disorder is also quite a contentious topic, which I'm not really going to talk about because it was spoken about at last year's conference. But there's a fight between the DSM and ICD. So DSM is the American Psychiatric Association. They have yet to confirm their belief in whether video gaming addiction disorder should be a thing. But the ICD has already written it down in their list of medical conditions. So it is a recognized medical condition in the ICD-10. But basically, to understand what video gaming addiction disorder is, that it's a pattern of behavior that impairs your function. That's the main point. So any psychiatric disorder is where there's an impairment of your responsibilities, family, social, education, or occupational areas of your life. So if it's not impairing those aspects, it can't be considered a video gaming addiction disorder. But there is a but, because there are positives. The benefits of gaming, and especially seen in esports, like competitive esports players, is massive and quite well documented. So the 5 topics that I've chosen to speak about is cognitive, motivational, emotional, social, and other benefits. So when you're thinking of cognitive, it's basically all of the executive functions of your brain. So you have faster and more accurate attention allocation. So this not only benefits you in gaming, but also in everyday life. So I can speak for myself. Having been an ex-competitive player, I feel that subjectively my attention allocation is quite good when it comes to noticing problems in patients that are not always mentioned verbally. You also have higher spatial resolution. So this is the ability to visualize things that you have never seen before. So the ability to see atoms, or electrons rather, revolving around a nucleus of an atom. These are things that you can visualize, but you have never actually seen before. So that's called spatial resolution. Mental rotational abilities is how you essentially rotate things in your mind. So seeing something in 2D, but being able to visualize it in 3D. And then enhanced creativity. Motivational benefits is that video gamers and esports gamers especially are highly motivational and highly driven, simply because of the way in which sort of esports is structured. If you, for example, if you play League of Legends, you will lose a lot more games than you win, but you keep going back and you keep playing more. And that's sort of the development of motivational processes that esports gamers have, and seem to have a relentless, optimistic mentality. Emotionally, things like improving mood, being a relaxing activity, and promotion of self-esteem are actually things that have been proven in video games and in esports. Socially, if you think about people who are quite shy, they have the opportunity to connect with people on a platform that they are comfortable on, and especially in esports that they are good at and considered good at in the community, and therefore this is a good opportunity for them to have a platform to build lasting friendships, to form social, pro-social behaviors, and to develop social nuances and cues. And I would like to believe that it's a safe environment for players to become emotionally involved with others, although the internet can sometimes be not a very safe place, but yes. And then other things are faster reaction time, memory improvement, and benefits in patients with like Parkinson's and dementia, which is not necessarily related to esports, but is a very important thing to realize, that there is a place for esports gaming and other electronic games and such in the helping and sort of advancement of health and health promotion. So, having said that, what are the solutions to these problems? So I think sponsorships. Which companies are we allowing to sponsor our esports gamers is very important. We want our esports gamers to be role models, and if you're allowing someone to sponsor you, it means that you are agreeing to the product that they are essentially delivering. So I think that's a good place to start. Also, regulating of ads to gamers. There is actually a very interesting thing that I was thinking about. Mercedes-Benz is a car, I'm sure you all know, but they have sort of on their console, if you've been driving for over an hour, it gives you a warning that says that you have been driving for over an hour, and that that it's highly recommended that you stop, you get out of the car, you stretch your legs, or you take a rest. So I think this is also something that we can think about implementing in the esports environment. Also placing warnings on drinks, placing warnings for people to get up and stretch. As I've said, ergonomic setups, and then limiting gameplay time. See, the problem is that no studies have been done or show what is the optimal amount of time for esports gamers to play. No one there is no literature that says 4 hours is the limit or 6 hours is the limit, you know? So I think this is also something that we should be aware of. Not all esports gamers are the same. Not all have the same sort of like time-related dependency on like whether they're going to get benefits or detriments from playing. So, yeah.